You walk around this building and everyone is so supportive and so excited about what is happening with the Fever. And
nobody expected the Indiana Fever's own leadership to finally say the quiet part out loud. But when the woman running the franchise stepped forward and addressed the Caitlin Clark situation publicly, it instantly sent shockwaves across the basketball world. Because suddenly, the curtain was pulled back on everything happening behind the scenes inside Indiana. The pressure, the politics, the locker room chemistry, the balancing act between building a championship team and building a billion-dollar brand. And once you hear the full story, it completely changes the way people look at Caitlin Clark's time with the Fever. To really understand how all of this exploded, you have to go back to where it truly started. Before Caitlin Clark ever arrived in Indiana, the Fever were practically invisible in the WNBA landscape. This was a franchise that had fallen completely off the radar. They won 6 games in 2021, only 5 in 2022, and 13 in 2023. 4 years, they had become an afterthought. The arenas weren't full. National media barely paid attention. Nobody circled Indiana on the schedule anymore. The spotlight had disappeared. Then everything changed overnight. The moment Caitlin Clark entered the building as the #1 overall pick in the 2024 WNBA draft, the entire direction of the franchise flipped upside down. Clark didn't just bring talent. She brought an entire movement with her. Suddenly, every Fever game became must-watch television. Arenas started selling out everywhere Indiana traveled. Television ratings exploded to levels women's basketball had never seen before. Jerseys disappeared from stores almost instantly. The attention surrounding the Fever became massive, practically overnight. And that's when the organization found itself facing a decision it never expected to make. Were they going to fully embrace the reality that Caitlin Clark had become the face of the franchise, and arguably the face of women's basketball itself, or were they going to try to shift the focus towards something bigger than one player? That's where things started getting complicated. The Fever brought back Kelly Krauskopf as president of basketball and business operations. On paper, it looked like the perfect move. She had history with the organization, helped build the championship team in 2012, and understood the franchise better than almost anyone. But during her very first press conference, there was a comment that seemed harmless at the time but later became one of the most controversial moments of the entire Caitlin Clark era. Months later, in July 2025, with Clark sidelined due to injuries and fan frustration reaching a boiling point, social media users rediscovered that old press conference clip. In it, Krauskopf talked about wanting the Fever to become an enduring brand, like Apple or something. And the internet absolutely exploded. Because fans didn't hear a visionary statement. They heard something completely different. To many Clark supporters, it sounded like the organization was already trying to position the franchise as bigger than the player who had single-handedly transformed it. And that comparison to Apple only made the backlash stronger because people immediately pointed out that Apple itself became iconic because it leaned completely into Steve Jobs as its visionary centerpiece. Fans flooded social media accusing the Fever of downplaying the most important athlete in franchise history. Many argued that without Caitlin Clark, none of this new attention even exists. The sold-out arenas, record-breaking ratings, and national relevance were all tied directly to one person. So hearing leadership talk about the brand, instead of fully embracing Clark as the center of everything instantly rubbed people the wrong way. The backlash became so intense that Krauskopf's social media account suddenly disappeared entirely just hours after the clip went viral again. No explanation. No statement. Just silence. But while the internet was melting down over front office messaging, something else was happening inside the locker room that painted a very different picture. Clark's teammates kept publicly supporting her over and over again. Lexi Hull openly admitted that other teams around the league were jealous of the attention the Fever received ever since Clark arrived. Sophie Cunningham revealed that even before joining Indiana, players around the league talked about Caitlin Clark differently than any other athlete. According to Cunningham, opponents weren't just trying to beat Clark, they were trying to make statements against her. That physical targeting became one of the biggest storylines surrounding Clark's career almost immediately. Throughout the season, fans constantly debated whether officials were doing enough to protect her. Clark absorbed hard fouls, constant contact, and relentless physical defense night after night. By the time injuries eventually shut down her season after just 13 games, many people began wondering whether the league had failed to protect its biggest star properly. But perhaps the biggest misconception of all involved the Fever locker room itself. For months, critics pushed the idea that Clark's fame was causing tension internally. Rumors spread claiming teammates resented the attention she received. Hall of Famer Cheryl Swoops even suggested publicly that some players supposedly didn't want to be there anymore because of the spotlight surrounding Clark. The problem? Nobody inside the locker room backed those claims up. In fact, the opposite kept happening. When Clark returned during playoff moments, teammates celebrated with her emotionally. Players constantly praised her leadership. Aaliyah Boston remained extremely close with her. Lexi Hull defended her publicly. Sophie Cunningham practically became her on-court protector. Even newer players entering the organization spoke openly about how excited they were to play alongside Clark. The chemistry looked genuine. And that's what made the entire situation so fascinating. The real tension never appeared to be between Clark and her teammates. Instead, the bigger question became whether the organization itself truly understood what it had. Because there's no denying what Caitlin Clark did to the Fever. She transformed one of the league's least relevant teams into the center of women's basketball almost instantly. Ticket demand skyrocketed. Television audiences shattered records. Merchandise sales exploded. Even opposing arenas benefited financially whenever Indiana came to town. And yet, despite all of that, the messaging from the top of the organization kept circling back toward the franchise, the culture, and the brand, instead of fully embracing the reality that Clark herself was driving nearly all of the momentum. Still, Krauskopf did make one comment that ended up aging extremely well. She said that smart basketball players would naturally want to play with Caitlin Clark once they saw her style firsthand. And that prediction became true almost immediately. Veterans started showing interest in Indiana. Players accepted smaller roles and even financial sacrifices for opportunities to join the Fever. Suddenly Indiana became one of the most attractive destinations in the WNBA, not because of a logo or marketing strategy, but because players genuinely wanted to share the floor with Clark. Then came the difficult 2025 season. What was supposed to become Clark's breakout year instead turned into a nightmare physically. Injuries limited her to only 13 games. Yet even while sidelined, she still averaged over 16 points and nearly 9 assists per game. She still made the All-Star team. She still remained the central attraction of the entire league even while sitting on the bench in street clothes. Meanwhile, the Fever quietly continued building for the future. The organization invested heavily into a massive new performance center scheduled to open in 2027. The front office continued shaping the roster around Clark, Aaliyah Boston, and Kelsey Mitchell. And despite losing players in expansion drafts, the Fever still looked like one of the league's most promising long-term situations. But underneath every debate surrounding Indiana, one truth remained impossible to ignore. This franchise went from winning 5 games to becoming the most watched team in women's basketball almost instantly because of one player. That's not normal growth. That's a revolution. And revolutions don't happen because of branding strategies or corporate messaging. They happen because generational athletes completely changed the trajectory of a sport. Caitlin Clark did exactly that the second she entered the WNBA. That's why fans reacted so strongly to comments that sounded like the organization was trying to shift attention away from her importance. Because supporters recognize just how rare this moment truly is. Players like Clark do not come around often. The level of attention she brings is unprecedented in women's basketball history. And everyone inside that Fever locker room seems to understand it. Her teammates understand it. The fans understand it. Opposing teams definitely understand it. The only remaining question is whether every person making decisions above her fully understands it too. Because the opportunity sitting in front of Indiana right now is massive. The Fever are no longer rebuilding quietly in the background. They are now operating at the center of the sports world. And if they truly commit to maximizing everything Caitlin Clark brings both on and off the court, the franchise could dominate the next era of women's basketball. The window is open right now. The only thing left to find out is whether Indiana is bold enough to fully embrace it before that opportunity slips away.